We do need to take a national approach. More and more countries are saying this, but at the same time, we need to reconcile the fight against inequality, development, the climate biodiversity agenda. That's been accepted. No country, neither from Oceania, Latin America, Africa, Asia, none of these countries will accept that we dictate what they have to do in order to work on the climate to the detriment of their growth. Next, the need for private financing. That's all the more true. We've seen a shock to concessional public funding, and this for the reasons I mentioned earlier. Now, faced with this situation, I believe there are 4 work streams we need to focus on. I'm going to highlight them very quickly. First, we need to continue mobilizing new funding. Now, a few years ago, we managed to do this together with Kristina Georgieva back in 2021. We did manage to increase IMF capital and to reallocate special drawing rights from the richest. Now, this worked. We redistributed SDRs towards those countries which needed it most, over $100 billion worth of SDRs. This worked, and we need to continue in the same vein so that those who can continue reallocating SDRs. But on mobilizing new financing, I hope to continue down this path and to open up new paths. I know many of you are doing a great deal of work on this front, and I'd like to thank you. But what we need to do is levy new international taxes on sectors which are benefiting from globalization. A great deal of work has been done by the IMO, the International Maritime Organization. I'd like to thank the IMO, everyone who works for the IMO. Furthermore, work has been kick-started on international aviation, mobilizing and levying international taxes on these challenges, therefore creating additional capacity for funding our priorities. That's the first work stream. The second pillar, we need to do better on spending the public money we get. We started work on this in 2023 in Paris, and I commend all of the endeavors since then. Multilateral banks' balance sheets are being put to better use. Impact is better, the meager reform, the liquidity ratios that began at the World Bank, that's excellent, but more needs to be done on this front. And not for a second should we think that things have gotten better. That's far from the truth. All of the multilateral development banks who believe that they should keep their rating, that that's their objective, to maintain their credit rating without using guarantee instruments, they're wrong. I'll be perfectly frank. They're wrong. They need to do more to use their balance sheets, and we also need to do more to leverage our capacity to work together. This is what our development banks, our regional banks, our multilateral banks have been doing. Financing common, that's excellent. I'd like to hail the role the IFD has played on this front. We need to continue bringing all of these actors together so that they do make the most of their balance sheets. Next, we need to continue using leverage. So every time where we're using $1 or €1 of public funds, we need to catalyze the same amount being spent by the private sector. We are off to a good start, but we need to come up with new initiatives to harness this leverage effect, to draw more on the private sector. And this work is painstaking work. There are vertical funds who do need to do more to mobilize private financing. So that's the second work stream, better using public finances, which comes on top of the first one, mobilizing resources. This brings me to the third work stream. Country platforms. Let me explain. For a very long time, policies were devised in our capitals. They were devised by those who were giving the money, as opposed to those who were the recipients, although I don't very much like that word. But we need actors. What we actually need is actors. We need to respect sovereignty, respect for the independent sovereign choices made by countries which are facing very serious challenges. That's the only way we are to tackle these challenges effectively. So it's not just in rich country capitals that these policies should be devised. Official development assistance, ODA, coming from these rich countries, we also need investment that's sustainable, that exhibits solidarity. So what we need is more of these kinds of investments coming from our capitals, and they need to fertilize the choices that are devised in the countries that want to undergo transformation. Countries which, for various reasons, their history, their geography sometimes, for whatever reason, they're lagging somewhat behind on their way to prosperity. So we need to overhaul the paradigm, to change the way we talk about this, the way we devise our programs. We already begun this work on climate and energy. The Just Energy Transition Program, the JETP program. And I think we need to assess, to take stock of what's been done. I think the spirit of the program is right, but it needs to be more effective. So our banks, our agencies, our funds need to become more pragmatic. And when we bring them all together, when they sit down around the table, we need to think about projects. It needs to be project-based. We need coordinators. It's great to think about what everyone around the table can do to help a country. So we need to be more effective. We need to work together better. That's the end of what I wanted to say on that. Moving on to biodiversity and country packages. We now need to look at health policy. If we want for our investments in health, in the spirit of solidarity, to be more effective, we need to provide assistance for country strategies. And here we need to also think long and hard to revise our approach. And this is what I intend to work on in the run-up to the Lyon Summit and to the One Health Summit, which will be held at the start of November later this year. And countries have their share of responsibility to bear. They need to craft strategies and trajectories which are sustainable to ensure they can achieve the intended results and to be able to secure funding. The most sustainable financing is often domestic financing, and it goes hand in hand with the mobilization of international resources, these international taxes. We also need fair domestic taxation. So many countries, they have a tax rate that falls short of 15%. That points to a problem. Their attractiveness is limited, so as to continue down this trajectory, this country platform logic, we need much more responsibility. We need countries to take responsibility so that they have public sectors capable of funding health, education, and so on and so forth. And this brings me to the fourth and final work stream, which I really wanted to emphasize, given that we're under pressure on the development financing front. It's absolutely vital to come up with value chains, ways of generating economic wealth in the poorest countries, in developing countries, and in middle-income countries as well. Wherever we can do that, that is the best way of combating inequality. For this reason, whether it be health, and that's everything we've achieved since COVID, the African Union, they're platforms for producing solutions on the African continent, ACTA, for instance. On agriculture, that's what we wanted to do. Other flagship initiatives we've mounted over the last few years. It's what we wanted to do when you talk about natural resources. We're not just talking about extraction in Latin America, Africa, and Oceania. These regions have these resources. They need to transform them. They need industry in these countries. So we need to change the doctrine to ensure we build these value chains. Now, if we are to get there, we need three things. First, rich countries and their companies, they need to change their thinking, change their logic. The poorest countries, the countries of the humblest means, they need to be our partners. They need to be our partners so that we can create wealth and jobs in these countries. This is what I explained. This is what we're doing in the DRC, for instance. Second, we need to accelerate on all of the work we're doing on the cost of capital. We must be clear-eyed about this. Despite our good intentions, we've made it more and more difficult for international institutions, for the private sector, for our banks and our insurance companies to invest in developing countries and middle-income countries. And we did this by saying we need to de-risk that, de-risk this. And as a result, we have too much regulation, too much red tape around this, meaning we've crowded out investment. In parallel, risk assessments of the cost of investing in these countries has resulted in excessive private investment in these countries. So we need to reinvest in the countries who need it most and to mobilize various instruments to use first lost schemes and more effective guarantees to ensure that the countries who need it most get financing. Working on the cost of capital is indispensable, and I hail the African presidency of the G20, which decided to place this issue front and center of its agenda. Next, the cost of capital, the change of culture, and then there's also trade. But we're actually doing the opposite. Trade wars, tariff wars, starting these again at this point in the history of our planet. It's an aberration. There are some countries which were about to take off. Their economies were about to take off. Thus, we need to rethink what we're doing, and this is something I managed to do, that I hope to be able to manage to do in late October at the Paris Peace Forum, is support the WTO to bring it into line with our objectives on combating inequality, our climate goals. But what we need to do is ensuring more freedom, more fairness in international trade. We don't need barriers nor tariffs devised by the strongest countries. They're being used to blackmail certain countries. They're not being used to rebalance the global economy. So we need to rebalance global trade flows. That's a prerequisite for the creation of value change, for the generation of economic wealth in the poorest countries and in developing countries as well. So those are the 4 pillars I wanted to talk about. I won't take up any more of your time. I just wanted to encourage each and every one of you to maintain the level of ambition. I know the G20 is just around the corner, led by South Africa, especially on the cost of capital. The United Nations agenda will, of course, be receiving support. As you know, in Belém at the end of the year, at the COP, we'll continue driving forward our agenda. We have the Lyon summit, where we'll be working on health-related issues. And next year, France will be taking up the presidency of the G7. It's a great honor. And together with many of the countries in the room today, we will be continuing our efforts to accelerate the overhaul of our international architecture. We'll be doing this in a very pragmatic fashion, focused on a number of ambitions, a number of goals, which I've just mentioned. Mobilizing money where it's available to fund our priorities, making better use of public finances, the leverage effect for private funding, upholding the sovereignty of states, and developing value chains in the generation of wealth in all developing countries, as well as the poorest countries who need it. Thank you for your kind attention, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much to the government of Spain for their commitment.
I thank the President of the French Republic, and now I have the honor to invite His Excellency Ndaba Nkosinati Gaulate, Vice President of the Republic of Botswana.
Mr. President, Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I wish to extend our sincere gratitude to the government of the Kingdom of Spain for the warm hospitality provided to my delegation. Mr. President, it is with humility and a profound sense of responsibility that I address this assembly. Ours is a moment heavy with consequence, yet brimming with possibility. The world stands at a crossroads, gripped by a cascading crisis of climate disruption, geopolitical instability, and economic fragmentation. Yet, as history teaches us, it is at such moments that visionary leadership must rise, not with fear, but with purpose. It's time for all nations, small and big, to bring to the table resources, resilience, lived experience, and innovative solutions. Financial innovation remains vital, but what the world needs now is not only technical fixes, but shared moral clarity, the courage to act with justice, foresight, and solidarity. Through peace, prudence, fairness, and perseverance, Botswana has sustained one of Africa's most stable democracies. In 2024, we marked a historical milestone, a peaceful democratic transition of power after 58 years under one ruling party. It was not merely a political event, but a profound act of civic maturity and renewal. In 2024, our economy contracted by 3%, driven by a sharp decline in diamond sales amid global shifts and rising synthetic competition. Yet our non-diamond sectors grew by 4.2%, underscoring the underlying resilience we are building through diversification. We do not view adversity as defeat, but as a catalyst for reform. Botswana remains fiscally sound, with one of the lowest debt-to-GDP ratios in sub-Saharan Africa. Our commitment to inclusive and sustainable development remains firm. Our development planning process recognizes growth without justice is fragile, and development without equity is unsustainable. This is the ethic we bring to the global conversation. Africa contributes just 3.8% of global greenhouse gas emissions, yet it bears the brunt of climate devastation, from intensifying droughts in the Kalahari to the destructive floods across the continent. Climate change is not a distant risk, but a lived reality. Meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement will require an estimated 6.9 trillion annually by 2030 in sustainable infrastructure investment. These investments are critical to achieving climate-aligned development across energy, transport, water, and urban systems. Yet the gap between the need and delivery remains vast. We must invest in building capacity and capabilities that nourish productive ecosystems and plant or cultivate high-impact institutions. We must invest in both modern skills and modern infrastructure. More concerning still is that just 7% of MDB's funding reached national development banks in developing countries, according to an analysis by the Overseas Development Institute. This gap is not only financial, it is structural. Closing it is not just an economic imperative, but a matter of climate justice and shared global stability. In Botswana, our 2025 budget emphasizes broadening the tax base, formalizing the informal sector, and enhancing VAT compliance, all the while protecting the most vulnerable. We support the establishment of a UN Framework Convention on International Tax Cooperation with binding global standards for automatic information exchange, beneficial ownership transparency, and fair digital taxation. In the digital economy, justice must move faster than capital. Today, 60% of low-income countries are in or high risk of debt distress. We reject the false dichotomy between debt sustainability and development. For many countries, This is not just a fiscal debate, it is existential. Botswana supports first, the creation of a UN-led sovereign debt workout mechanism to ensure timely and equitable restructuring. Second, Botswana supports the green reallocation of unused special drawing rights from surplus nations to those most vulnerable to climate shocks. Mr. President, we must not allow technical assessments to override human dignity and opportunity. We cannot accept a world where a child's life chances are determined by a credit rating. Let us build a global system where the future is bankable and where dignity, not debt, determines destiny. In 2024, nearly 200 humanitarian workers lost their lives in conflict zones. These are not just statistics, they are warnings. If we fail to finance peace, we will be forced to fund conflict. The international financial system was built for another era. It must now be reimagined, not as a mechanism of control, but as a platform for co-creation, for resilience, and for justice. And in this spirit, Botswana supports the RRR agenda for multilateral development bank reform. Your Excellencies, vision is not merely the ability to predict the future, but it is also the courage to prepare for it and the conviction to shape it. Though modest in population, Botswana speaks with conviction, conviction grounded in moral clarity. We believe in leadership that dignifies and not dominates. Let us forge a new social contract for global finance, one rooted in planetary stewardship, intergenerational fairness, and shared responsibility. Let the 4th International Conference of Financing for Development be remembered not for what was said, but for what was started. Let us finance not just development, but peace, justice, and the imagination the future demands. I thank you.
I thank the Vice President of the Republic of Botswana, and now I have the honor to invite His Excellency Philip Isor Mpango, Vice President of the United Republic of Tanzania, to address the conference.
Mr. President of the conference, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Her Excellency Dr. Samia Suluhu Hassan, President of the United Republic of Tanzania, I would like to commend the United Nations and the government of Spain for hosting the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development in fulfillment of the General Assembly Resolution 78/231, which calls for building a renewed global financing framework to unlock greater capital for sustainable development. This conference is taking place at a time when the majority of developing countries are experiencing tightened fiscal space, rising debt burdens, and pressing social demands, and thus lagging behind in implementation of SDGs. Actually, since FFD3 in Addis Ababa, progress has been muted following the COVID-19 pandemic and its aftermath, geopolitical tensions and conflicts, dwindling ODA, increasing protectionism, effects of climate change, food and energy insecurity, and increasing debt burden. This conference, therefore, is crucial for shaping the global financial architecture with full participation of the Global South so as to create a new financial system that accommodates the voice and needs of developing countries. Tanzania's latest score on implementation of SDGs is around 60%, with significant progress made with respect to SDGs 2 to 7, as indicated by an increase in food sufficiency ratio, availability of essential medicines, decline in under 5 mortality, increase in school gross enrollment rates, gender equality, improved water supply coverage, and population connected to electricity. To advance and sustain these achievements, we are in need of a significant amount of affordable financing and partnerships to complement our domestic resource mobilization efforts, notwithstanding the limited fiscal space. As of now, 70% of our national budget is financed from domestic sources. However, in the 2025-26 budget, we were compelled to introduce new taxes to cover the financing gap caused by an unexpected cut in aid to combat HIV, AIDS, and TB. Tanzania's expectations out of this conference are that, first, the current system must deliver long-term, affordable, and stable financing for development and ensure inclusive governance with equal voice for developing countries. And hence, we call for comprehensive reforms of the global financial architecture. Second, we remain concerned with the rising debt distress across the Global South, and therefore we call for innovative approaches, including debt for climate and debt for development swaps. Similarly, sovereign credit rating systems must be changed to improve transparency and fairness. And this conference must also come up with pragmatic solutions to reduce borrowing costs and expand access to concessional and non-debt creating finance to make debt sustainable. Third, trade is a powerful driver of economic growth. However, in order to make trade work for development, we seek greater support in enhancing the productive capacity, meeting global standards, and adding value to our exports. Tanzania advocates for fair multilateral trading rules, simplified rules of origin, and duty-free, quota-free access to least developed countries. Fourth, innovation is central to transformation. And similarly, robust data systems, including disaggregated and real-time data, are required to guide evidence-based policymaking. And cognizant of these facts, Tanzania and other developing countries are investing in digital infrastructure, research, and technological innovation. However, we need partnership with countries from the global north and enhanced South-South cooperation to make further and quicker progress in harnessing science, technology, and data. Fifth, we believe that the international public finance should complement and facilitate national efforts. Long-term investments, including foreign direct investment, are needed in critical sectors, especially in sustainable energy, infrastructure and transport, industrialization, information and communication technologies, as well as diversification of African economies. And consequently, we call upon the global north to work with developing countries to de-risk investments and financing of mega projects in these critical sectors. And lastly, on integrating environmental protection and climate responsiveness, we acknowledge the importance of climate change mitigation measures in the context of the financing for development and call for sustainable management and restoration of ecosystems as explicit financing priorities. Expanded adaptation and resilience financing, urgent operationalization of the loss and damage fund, and climate finance through debt swaps. Mr. President, Tanzania expects concrete outcomes from this landmark conference. It should be about our common endeavor to create a conducive environment in support of a global framework that would deliver on our commitment to shared prosperity. We are optimistic that the conference will make us leave Sevilla with a renewed commitment to scale up financing for sustainable development. We also need to be bold in the drive to reform the international financial system. Let us reinvigorate multilateralism, inclusion, and prompt climate action for the benefit of our future generation. Muchas gracias.
I thank the Vice President of the United Republic of Tanzania. I now have the honor to invite His Excellency Mohamed Jello, Vice President of the Republic of the Gambia, to address the conference.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, let me begin by expressing on behalf of His Excellency President Adama Barrow, the government and people of the Gambia, our sincere appreciation to Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, the government and the people of Spain for their warm hospitality and for hosting this important gathering in the beautiful city, historic city of Sevilla. Mr. President, we meet today at a critical juncture. The promise of the 2030 agenda grows more distant, not for lack of ambition or political will, but because the global public financing system intended to support is under increasing strain and does not reflect the realities of the changing 21st century. The Sustainable Development Goals, with their bold vision to end poverty, reduce inequality, and safeguard our planet, cannot be achieved without adequate, predictable, and equitable financing. Yet, across the developing world, including the Gambia, we face tightening fiscal space, limited access to conventional financing, rising debt burdens, and a global financial architecture that too often fails the most vulnerable. Despite these constraints, the Gambia has made significant strides. We have undertaken comprehensive reforms to mobilize domestic resources, digitalize revenue systems, improve public finance management, and strengthen budget transparency. Our tax base has expanded, leakages have been reduced, and expenditure is being directed towards priority areas such as health, education, food security, and poverty reduction, all critical and indispensable to achieving the noble goals of the SDGs and their target ambitions. We are aligning our national development agenda with the SDGs through strategic planning, institutional coordination, and enhanced statistical capacity. Local governments are being empowered, and development financing is being integrated more effectively through instruments like our medium-term revenue strategy and our integrated national financing framework. Importantly, we are improving our ability to track, report, and assess the impact of SDG-related financing. These steps are helping to lay the foundation for a more accountable, responsive, and effective public finance system. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, despite our progress, our development journey remains constrained by systemic barriers. Our economy, still heavily reliant on consumption tax revenue, and vulnerable sectors like agriculture and tourism, struggles under a narrow revenue base and exposed to external shocks, economic, climatic, and geopolitical. High debt servicing costs consume a significant share of our national budget, crowding out investment in the development priorities. Much of this debt was contracted on terms that no longer reflect today's economic realities. Without a fair and inclusive global debt architecture that offers timely, comprehensive relief and supports long-term development, countries like the Gambia will remain trapped in a cycle of borrowing to survive rather than to invest to thrive. We strongly support mechanisms such as debt for development and debt for climate swaps. These are not just technical solutions, they are presumed on justice and humanitarian principles. They allow us to redirect resources from repayments to real investment in our people and our planet. Access to concessional financing remains hampered by outdated eligibility criteria and bureaucratic hurdles. The private sector, though full of potential, remains underdeveloped, limited opportunities to blended finance. Aid volatility, project-based finance funding undermine long-term planning and capacity building. Even with sound policies in place, many of us simply lack the financing needed to deliver lasting change. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, to build a more resilient and inclusive future, we must embrace the transformative power of science, technology, and innovation. We call for meaningful commitments to technology transfer, digital inclusion, and stronger national data systems without which we cannot govern effectively or track SDG progress. Equally, we urge a fairer global trading system, one that enables small economies like ours to move beyond raw commodity exports, add value at home, and access global markets on equitable terms. Without structural reforms to global finance and trade system, our progress will continue to be shaped by rules we do not create, but which define our realities. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, we join others in calling for a reformed international financial architecture that is inclusive, representative, and responsive to today's development landscape. Africa, home to nearly 1/5 of humanity and dynamic economies, must have a meaningful voice in global finance decision-making. This is not only a matter of fairness, it is essential for the legitimacy and effectiveness of the system itself. We also echo call for more agile, transparent, and accountable financing instruments that can respond to shocks, support social transformation, and align with national priorities. As this conference concludes, we urge that its outcome delivers more than declarations. We hope for tangible commitments that expand access to conventional finance, reform debt frameworks, strengthen domestic resource mobilization, and support low-income countries in achieving the SDGs. The outcome document of this conference holds great promise. We must trust it will not remain aspirational, but will be translated into meaningful action. The people of the Gambia and millions across the developing world deserve nothing less. I thank you for your kind attention.
I thank the Vice President of the Republic of the Gambia, and just before proceeding to the next speaker, I'd like to remind the delegation of their agreed time limit of 5 minutes. Speakers with longer statements are encouraged to read a shorter version of their text and to submit the full version for posting in the Journal of the United Nations. I now have an honor to invite His Excellency Prosper Bazombanza, Vice President of the Republic of Burundi, to address the conference.
Excellences,
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. Allow me at the outset to give thanks to the Lord who has made it possible for us to meet here on Spanish lands. I would like to express my gratitude to the Spanish government and the Spanish people for the legendary welcome and hospitality that they have given myself and my delegation since we arrived here in this beautiful city of Seville. I am speaking on behalf of His Excellency Evariste Ndayishimiye, President of the Republic of Burundi, who has asked me to convey to you his brotherly greetings full of esteem and solidarity. Burundi is grateful for the trust and the honor that member states bestowed upon it in naming Burundi to co-chair the preparatory process for the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development, which concluded with a resounding success, a sign that multilateralism is still alive despite the headwinds it is facing right now. Our presence here in Seville is the fruit of months of open dialogue, of continuous effort, and of a genuine commitment to rebuilding trust between nations in a world where economic, climate, and social divides are widening dangerously. The Global South is not asking for favors. It is asking for consistency, and we are saying so here with respect, but also with frankness. Our peoples can no longer pay the price of a global economic system that we inherited from 1945, a system which not only is no longer suited to modern-day realities, but which also, and above all, has failed to keep its promises. The Sevilla commitment must be respected. It recognizes that sustainable development goals cannot be attained without a far-reaching transformation of global financing mechanisms. The document marks a turning point, and Burundi welcomes the inclusion of several priorities of the Global South in it, and allow me to mention a few here. Firstly, domestic resources mobilization through equitable taxation and firm action against illicit financial flows. Secondly, the urgent reform of the international financial architecture to ensure that this architecture reflects the voices, the needs, and the rights of developing countries. Thirdly, acknowledgement of the environmental debt, which calls for equitable debt forgiveness mechanisms or debt swap mechanisms. And fourthly, heightened support for fragile and vulnerable states, including many African countries who are grappling with the triple crisis of debt, climate change, and conflict. Burundi would like to launch a solemn appeal for the implementation of the Sevilla commitment to be credible and tangible. Burundi, therefore, is calling for the establishment of transparent monitoring mechanisms with measurable, common and regularly evaluated indicators. Secondly, we want to establish an annual accountability forum under the auspices of the United Nations, which would bring together states, technical and financial partners, and civil society. And thirdly, we call for a commitment to publish within 12 months national sustainable financing plans aligned with the principles adopted here in Seville. We need to build confidence because we believe in a renewed multilateralism that is focused on the rule of law, human rights, inclusion, tax justice, and long-term investment. This implies a shift of paradigm, moving from occasional assistance towards sustainable partnerships that are mutually beneficial and based on co-responsibility. Africa, and more broadly the Global South, are not the fringes of our world. They are the future of it, a future that we want to build together in a spirit of solidarity, but also in a spirit of justice, trust, and mutual respect. By way of conclusion, Burundi will remain fully committed to the follow-up of this process to ensure that the Sevilla commitment marks the beginning of genuine change and charts the course towards a fairer and more equitable future. I thank you for your kind attention.
I thank the Vice President of the Republic of Burundi, and I now have the honor to invite our next speaker, His Excellency Timoko Melie Kone, Vice President of the Republic of Cote d'Ivoire.
Monsieur le Président,
President of the Conference, Heads of State and Government, United Nations Secretary General, President of the General Assembly of the United Nations, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, speaking on behalf of the President of the Republic of Cote d'Ivoire, His Excellency Alassane Ouattara, extend our greetings to the United Nations Organization and the Government of Spain. We'd like to thank them for convening this very important conference on financing for development. We meet at a turning point in our common history. The post-COVID-19 repercussions remain visible. Geopolitical and security tensions are multiplying. Inflation is weighing on most vulnerable economies. At the same time, the climate crisis is upending all development strategies. On top of this, there's heightened volatility of global financial markets, as well as the calling into question of multilateralism. The aforementioned challenges are making economies more fragile, especially developing countries' economies. They are threatening everything we've achieved, our hard-won gains achieved over many years. Nonetheless, the financing required to achieve the SDGs has never been greater. According to a joint report published by the OECD and the African Union in April of last year, Africa needs to close a $1.6 billion financing gap to have any hope of achieving the aforementioned objectives. The least developed countries, the LDCs, in particular those on the African continent, are often tackling growing constraints exacerbated by international financial rules that are often poorly tailored to their national reality. On this note, I'd like to recall that there's an increasingly pressing need for a deep overhaul of the international financial architecture so as to make international financial institutions more equitable. Similarly, we call for the development of innovative mechanisms that would allow the LDCs to mobilize more concessional financing on international financial markets. And this at a time when public aid available is in decline. These mechanisms include the conversion of onerous short-term debt into less expensive long-term financing, as well as the issuance of Eurobonds in local currency, all of which would help reduce vulnerability linked to foreign exchange risk. The issuance of carbon credits deserves greater attention on our part, as by lifting regulatory and technical barriers, we could allow states to fully monetize their forest conservation efforts. In order for these solutions to be widely used, it's absolutely vital that there's a better assessment of risks, which are often overblown when it comes to the countries of the Global South. It's therefore vital for financial markets to assess our countries in a fairer fashion and to base their assessments on economic fundamentals. Developing countries need to strengthen their governance. They can do this by implementing policies which promote human capital development, macroeconomic stability, as well as by mobilizing domestic resources. As for the industrialized countries, they must fully shoulder their share of their responsibilities by respecting the financial commitments they've undertaken, especially those they took on at the climate COP, COP29. These resources are absolutely vital if we are to help the most vulnerable to confront the effects of climate change and to do this without straying from their development trajectories. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, at a time when the global world order is seriously being put to the test, rethinking development financing becoming an absolute necessity. We must therefore create a new global financing pact that's fairer and better tailored to the LDCs to ensure prosperity that is truly shared. I thank you.
I thank the Vice President of the Republic of Cote d'Ivoire, and I want to present our next speaker, His Excellency Michael Biswick UC, Vice President of the Republic of Malawi.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, on behalf of His Excellency Dr. Lazarus McCarthy Chakwera, President of the Republic of Malawi, and indeed the people of Malawi, allow me to thank the people of Spain for the warm welcome. Malawi is honored to address this conference under the timely theme, Financing Our Future. Malawi aligns fully with the call for a just, equitable, and transformative global financing framework. Malawi recently launched its integrated national financing framework with UN support, a commitment to bridge fiscal gaps and achieve our Malawi 2063 vision. Wealth creation remains our priority. First, we prioritize domestic resource mobilization by strengthening tax systems, integrating the informal sector, and improving public expenditure efficiency. Second, we anchor development in private sector engagement and trade. We urge enhanced support for trade infrastructure and market access alongside fair multilateral trade rules. Third, reforming international financial architecture is vital. We call for reforming international financial institutions to ensure the system equitably delivers development aspirations of all countries, particularly developing countries. Debt relief, highly concessional loans, blended finance, and official development assistance are essential for countries like Malawi facing disproportionate impact of climate and pandemic shocks. Mr. President, investing in science, technology, and innovation is non-negotiable. We must bridge technological gaps and empower youth and women for sustainable development. Malawi supports nationally owned, inclusive, resilient financing frameworks. Let us embrace the integrated national financing framework as the pathway forward. I thank you all for your kind attention.
I thank the Vice President of the Republic of Malawi, and I now have the honor to invite His Excellency Feleti Teo, Prime Minister of Tuvalu, on behalf of the Pacific Small Island Developing States.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it is my immense honor to address this August gathering on behalf of the Pacific Small Island Developing States that carries the acronyms of PSIDS. The PSIDS represent a region usually characterized by vast ocean space with limited land and natural endowment, geographically isolated from major markets, underdeveloped economic infrastructures, and severely susceptible to global shock. Mr. President, we associate ourselves with the statement to be delivered by the Alliance of Small Island States, AOSIS. We also joined earlier speakers in expressing our sincere appreciation to the 4 co-facilitators, Nepal, Norway, Mexico, and Zambia, for their exceptional efforts in steering a transparent, inclusive, and meticulous negotiation process of the Seville commitment. We also thank our gracious host, Spain, for her steadfast leadership in championing the financing for development process amid a challenging geopolitical backdrop, and for the exceptional hospitality extended to us all. Spain's stellar leadership radiates a powerful message that multilateralism can still deliver, despite the absence of one major global power from the table. Excellencies, we came to Seville with high expectation that this conference will deliver concrete, ambitious commitments to guide global financing cooperation through 2030 and beyond. Yet the outcome document was heavily watered down, particularly on the most urgent systemic issues such as debt restructuring, international tax justice, and climate finance. We meet at a historical inflection point with the world gripped by a mounting debt crisis, accelerating climate collapse, widening global inequalities, and global conflict. The choice before us is stark. We either stand with the world's most vulnerable and deliver justice, or continue to support a flawed global financial system that perpetuates this crisis. Distinguished delegates, allow me to share some reflections on 6 thematic areas aligned with PSID's priority. Firstly, on the urgency of climate justice. History teaches us what is possible when the world takes crisis seriously. In the aftermath of World War II, the Marshall Plan and the Bretton Woods system were established in record time. At the onset of COVID-19, we witnessed the largest ever allocation of special drawing rights deployed urgently by developed nations. Yet today, as we confront the greatest threat of our era, climate change, there is no such urgency. Where is the Marshall Plan for climate action? Why does bold action have to arrive only after catastrophe, when foresight could prevent it? We are seriously disappointed that agreed language on climate change was removed from the final outcome. We therefore reiterate our call for urgent, scaled-up adaptation finance alongside the rapid operationalization and replenishment of the Loss and Damage Fund. We welcome the Baku to Belém roadmap to $1.3 trillion and urge all parties to meet their Paris Agreement commitments urgently. We cannot afford to delay any further, because justice delayed is justice denied. Secondly, Mr. President, in respect of countries in special situations, we welcome the reaffirmation of the special situations of LDCs, LLDCs, and SITs in the Sevilla commitment. For PSITs, our geographic isolation, limited economies of scale, and acute vulnerability to external shocks demands responses tailored to our needs. That is why we urge the full and immediate implementation of the Antigua and Barbuda agenda for SITs, reinforced by the formal integration of the multidimensional vulnerability index into criteria for eligibility and access to finance. The MVI offers a more accurate and just reflection of our structural vulnerabilities and should be used to inform access to concessional finance, debt sustainability measures, and eligibility for development support. Equally urgent is the operationalization of the SIT Center of Excellence and the Island Investment Forum, both critical platforms for coordinated delivery and accountability. At the same time, many SITs are burdened by unsustainable debt, driven not by mismanagement, but by repeated recovery from climate disasters and external shocks. We therefore welcome the opportunity for an intergovernmental process on debt and urge that it be used to create a more inclusive, equitable, and development-oriented debt architecture that accounts for special circumstances of PSITs and others. Thirdly, concerning correspondent banking relationship, we appreciate the inclusion of language calling for action to mitigate the unintended impacts of anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing measures. We urge relevant institutions to act through targeted technical support, robust capacity building, and tailored, durable solutions to protect and restore correspondent banking relationship in vulnerable jurisdictions like some of us in the Pacific region. Mr. President, fourthly, concerning international tax cooperation and special drawing rights, with only 5 years remaining to achieve the SDGs and a financing gap of over 4.2 trillion annually, business as usual is no longer acceptable. Even a modest 2% annual tax on the world's billionaires could unlock over 250 billion, enough to begin closing critical global gaps in development finance. We therefore support the establishment of a UN framework Convention on International Tax Cooperation and call for fair taxation of billionaires' wealth and multinational profits. Furthermore, in today's environment, where allocation for official development assistance are increasingly redirected toward defense spending, SDRs are more important than ever, as they offer a fiscal neutral alternative. We therefore reiterate the call for the urgent rechanneling of unused SDRs, including via multilateral development banks. We also underscore that domestic resource mobilization must be strengthened in parallel. For PSITs, structural limits such as narrow tax bases, small markets, and limited capacity require targeted support to build resilient revenue systems. Blended finance alone is not a solution. Our small private sector needs tailored instruments and dedicated windows that reflect our context and scale. Excellencies, fifthly, concerning the ocean and SDG 14, 2 weeks ago at the third UN Ocean Conference, we reaffirmed that the ocean is not just a part of our environment, it is our economy, our culture, and our identity. At UNOC 3, it was acknowledged that SDG 14 on life below water remains the most underfunded of all the SDG. We call for a substantial increase in sustained, predictable, and accessible finance for ocean action, with priority given to SITS-led initiative. We urge the full implementation of the BBNJ agreement and the global biodiversity framework and demands that CIT's priority be fully integrated into the design and governance of ocean-related funds and mechanisms. Excellencies, lastly, on the matter of fossil fuel and a just transition, we must not lose sight of the root cause of the climate crisis, fossil fuels. CITs contribute negligibly to this emergency, yet here we are, bearing its full cost. We are deeply disappointed that language on the phase-out of fossil fuels was removed from the outcome document. We call for a just, equitable, and time-bound global phase-out of fossil fuel. Distinguished delegate, the Seville commitments give us a foundation, but a lot remains to build on that foundation. What we need now is bold action, political will, and relentless follow-through. In this regard, we offer our full support to the Sevilla Platform for Action, SPA, a tool with the potential power to turn commitment into concrete results. The SPA can help shift us towards a financing system that is more just, more inclusive, and fit for the climate-resilient future we urgently need and seek. Excellencies, as we depart Seville, let it be remembered that the PCITs, like all CITs and LDCs, are demanding fairness and justice and a financing system that reflects the urgency of now and the dignity of the people whose lives depend on our decision. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the Prime Minister of Tuvalu, and I now have the honor to invite our next speaker, His Excellency KP Sharma Oli, Prime Minister of Nepal, to speak on behalf of the least developed countries.
Distinguished co-chairs, Your Excellencies, the heads of state and government, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I am pleased to deliver this statement on behalf of the group of the least developed countries. Let me begin by expressing heartfelt gratitude to the government and people of Spain for generous hospitality and for warmly welcoming us into this historic and beautiful city. Excellencies, a decade ago in Addis Ababa, the world pledged solidarity with the LDCs. The commitment was also echoed in the 2030 agenda. We promised to leave no one behind and committed to uplift the farthest behind first. 10 years on, the world is making progress. Global GDP has grown roughly from 75 trillion to 115 trillion. But inequality is rising between and within nations. At the very moment when solidarity is most needed, official development assistance is shrinking. Debt is suffocating the South. Specifically, LDC's debt has tripled in the last decade. Trade is fractured. Growth is unequal. Investment remains weak, and poverty is persistent. Technology and innovation are advancing in leaps and bounds in developed countries. But the LDCs face a stark technological and digital divide, seriously hindering their economic and social progress. Poor and inadequate infrastructure continues to impede our potential. In global development forums, LDCs remain marginalized, their voices often unheard. Climate change strikes LDCs the hardest, although they emit less than 1% of greenhouse gas. After Addis Ababa, only 4 LDCs have graduated. Excellencies, despite multiple challenges, LDCs are resolute to overcome them with the strength and ingenuity of their people, as well as the support and solidarity of their development partners. This is also demonstrated by the 14 LDCs advancing toward graduation. Against this backdrop, the Sevilla commitment we adopted today gives us a chance to change the course. It promises a renewed global financing framework for the realization of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The developing countries, particularly LDCs, strongly urge for its full implementation in good faith and high spirits. In this regard, we call for justice and fairness in the global economic and financial system. We stand for reform of global financial architecture. We urge our development partners to deliver 0.7% ODA commitment to developing countries and to meet and go beyond 0.2% for the LDCs. We seek grants and concessional finance on fairer terms. We stand for rules-based and equitable global trading system where all countries accrue benefits. We stand for vibrant private sectors connecting global north and global south through value chains, bringing common prosperity to all. We stand for a UN-led tax convention. We call for adequate climate finance that is concessional, predictable, and accessible. The Sevilla commitment must serve as a vital catalyst for the development and progress of all the LDCs. It must also ensure a smooth, irreversible, and sustainable graduation. Excellencies, let me touch briefly upon my national context now. We are graduating from the LDC status in 2026. While our determination remains firm, we need robust support from our development partners to realize our development aspirations. Nepal is proud to have served as a co-facilitator of Sevilla commitment alongside Norway, Gambia, and Mexico. We thank all member states for their trust. Excellencies, let us implement the Sevilla agenda with urgency to overcome despair and to reignite hope. Hope for a fairer global governance system that respects all voices. Hope for partnerships built on solidarity. Hope for sensible investment in people and planet. Hope for a better world where no country is left behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister of Nepal. I now have the honor to invite our next speaker, His Excellency Gaston Afonso Brown, Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, Corporate Governance, and Public-Private Partnerships of Antigua and Barbuda. He speaks on behalf of the Caribbean community.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Caribbean community, CARICOM. We gather at a moment that is defining for multilateralism and for the credibility of our collective commitment to sustainable development. For the small island developing states of the Caribbean, the convergence of climate vulnerability, rising debt distress, and financial volatility is eroding hard-won gains and deepening inequalities. It is clear that incremental measures will no longer suffice. We require a transformational approach to development finance, one that reflects the scale and urgency of the challenges we face. CARICOM underscores 5 priorities. Firstly, we call on international financial institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, and the regional development banks to redefine eligibility for concessional finance, integrating the multidimensional vulnerability as essential criterion. The Multidimensional Vulnerability Index must not remain an academic exercise. It must translate into real, timely access to affordable financing for SIDS. Second, we urge developed partners and IFIs to scale up grant-based and highly concessional climate finance, including the replenishment of adaptation funding and the operationalization of the Loss and Damage Fund. Access must be simplified and tailored to the administrative capabilities of small island economies. Third, we call for development and mainstreaming of state contingent debt instruments, including natural disaster clauses and climate-resilient debt deferrals. All creditors, bilateral, multilateral, and private, should adopt such tools as standard practice to build fiscal resilience. Fourth, we stress the imperative to mobilize private investment at scale for the green and blue economies. We urge IFIs and multilateral development banks to expand guarantees and blended finance mechanisms to de-risk investments in clean energy, resilient infrastructure, and inclusive digital transformation. To support project preparation facilities to help SIDS develop bankable pipelines of sustainable investments. To align capital adequacy frameworks to unlock additional lending capacity. Fifth, and critically, we underscore the need to ensure coherence and alignment across global agendas. The commitment embedded in the Pact for the Future, the Financing for Development process, the Net Zero Transition, and the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Agreement, just to name a few, must converge into an integrated and mutually reinforcing architecture of support. For countries with different development typologies, the adopted 10-year programs of action, including the Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for SIDS 2024 to 2034, the Doha Program of Action for LDCs 2023 to 2033, and the forthcoming outcome document of the 3rd UN Conference on Landlocked Developing Countries, must be enabled by the Financing for Development process. Sustainable financing is a prerequisite for any sustainable development gains. These agendas are not only essential for sustainable development, they are also fundamental to global peace and security. Small island developing states, despite their size and vulnerability, are stewards of vast ocean spaces, facilitators of vital trade corridors, and custodians of biodiversity that benefits all humanity. Recognizing and supporting these contributions are both moral imperatives and a strategic investment in our shared future. Fragmentation of financing frameworks, eligibility rules, and reporting requirements
impose unsustainable burdens on small island administrations, and undermine collective effectiveness. We urge all partners to ensure these processes are streamlined, coherent, and accessible, delivering predictable and transformational support. Excellencies, colleagues, the Pact for the Future provides a clear blueprint. Solidarity, equity, and urgency must guide our action. CARICOM stands ready to work with all partners, development banks and private sector, civil society, to implement this vision. But we are clear, the time for incremental adjustments has passed. We need a decisive shift in how global finance is structured, allocated, and delivered. Let us act with ambition worthy of this pivotal decade. Distinguished colleagues, I now deliver the national statement of Antigua and Barbuda. For over 30 years, small island developing state SIDS have spoken repeatedly about their deep economic and social vulnerabilities. And for over 30 years, the world has largely failed to respond adequately. Last May, we declared in Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for SIDS, the ABAS, that the next 10 years will determine whether SIDS have a fighting chance at a just, resilient, and sustainable future. For Antigua and Barbuda and for all island nations, this is not a theoretical debate. It is our daily reality. We have sounded the alarm again and again. Without fundamental reform of the global financial architecture, SIDS will remain trapped in a vicious cycle of costly borrowings, escalating debt, and rising vulnerability. Yet today, we are echoing the same appeals. How many times must we repeat the same thing before we see this crucial alignment? Repetition without response is not diplomacy. It is a consequence of global inertia, benign neglect, or perhaps, most likely, disrespect. Mr. President, the SIDS have indicated this decade should be a decisive one. We had hoped that this conference would mark an inflection point, a moment of bold action. Instead, in our declaration to the world, the language is soft, ambition muted, and the balance of power unchanged. The UN 80 process recognizes this fatigue. But the answer is not in spreadsheets or austerity programs. The answer must be a bold rethink of how development is financed and for whom. SIDS have been recognized as a special case since 1974. But recognition without action means nothing. Lip service cannot build resilience. Platitudes cannot fund preparedness. What we need is a firm commitment and urgent realignments. At the SIDS-4 conference in Antigua and Barbuda last year, we chose a new path to craft our own solutions, leading to the creation of the Debt Sustainability Support Service, or DSSS. The DSSS is more than a policy instrument. It is a SIDS-led mechanism to create fiscal space, to reduce risk, and unlock investment. It complements global reforms and is rooted in our lived reality. For too long, SIDS have walked an economic tightrope, battered by climate shocks and trapped by an unjust financial architecture. We are forced to divert funds from schools and clinics, not because we want to, but because we must. It takes only one storm, one shock, to set us back a decade. Some SIDS even fall below LDC income as a result of these shocks. Yet they are told that they are too rich for concessional financing. This is not only unjust and backward-looking, it is one of the great economic failures of our time. Let me state clearly, with these routine macro-level threats and shocks, SIDS are too small and vulnerable, lacking resilience to graduate from concessional funding. The ABAS, with the Center of Excellence, and the DSSS offers a transformative homegrown path forward. The DSSS bridges the gap between theory and action. It does not replace global institutions. It strengthens them by ensuring SIDS are not left behind. We now urge this conference to explicitly support the operationalization of the DSSS. Let us carry it forward through to the G20, to COP, to the Bretton Woods institutions, and beyond. Excellencies, despite our negligible emissions, we pay the highest price for climate change. We are punished for our vulnerability, and our investment in resilience results in a perversive lowering of our credit ratings. A DSSS Commission study shows that properly valuing resilience could raise SIDS credit scores by 35% and shift GDP from contraction to growth. We are also losing billions to currency risk. Over 2 decades, SIDS have paid over $10 billion more than the value of their original debt due to exchange rate depreciation. And that is more than the combined annual education and health budgets of SIDS. We borrowed for socioeconomic development and to repair damaged infrastructure, incurring penalties we never agreed to. It is time to recognize climate vulnerability as a systemic financial risk and to score resilience not as a liability, but as a credit enhancement. Today, I issue this clarion call to action. 1, to establish and support the DSSS with strong, transparent governance. 2, to invite the private sector, development banks, and philanthropic partners to join us with capital and innovative instruments, including debt swaps and the rechanneling of SDRs. 3, institutionalize and give strong backing to the SIDS Center of Excellence, as recommended in the Finance for Development outcome. And 4thly, to adopt the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index, the MVI, across all platforms, the UN, Bretton Woods, OECD, and the Paris Club. Kindly note that we're not asking for charity, but for a fair and collective process to develop concrete recommendations and practical avenues towards enhancing debt sustainability and addressing systemic gaps. If we fail to act, we will not only fail vulnerable SIDS, we would have failed humanity. I call in every development partner to walk with us, stand with us, and certainly to reform with us. We seek not sympathy, but solidarity, not pity, but partnership, not charity, but change. I thank you.
I thank the Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Corporate Governance and Public-Private Partnerships of Antigua and Barbuda. And I now have the honor to invite our next speaker, His Excellency Abdoulaye Maïga, Prime Minister, Head of Government, Minister of Territorial Administration and Decentralization of the Republic of Mali. He speaks on behalf of the Alliance of Sahel States.
Monsieur le Président de la Conférence.
President of the Conference, Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, Secretary General of the United Nations, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. I am taking the floor on behalf of the Confederation of Sahel States, the ASS. At the outset, I would like to extend the heartfelt greetings of the Excellencies, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, President of FASO, and Head of State, and Army General Assimi Goïta, President of the Transition and Head of State of the Republic of Mali, President of the ASS Confederation and Army General Abdurrahman Tiani, President of the Republic of Niger, Head of State, and on behalf of the peoples of the Sahel, who are deeply committed to the ideals of cooperation for development purposes. President, the Sahel states have for a decade been confronting terrorism, which has been thrust upon them by the proven involvement of foreign state sponsors. Our commitment to our people is unswerving. We want to make the ASS a regional power throughout Africa, as well as to improve the living conditions of our people and to put an end to their torture and their suffering. Thus, under the auspices of our heads of state, the defense and security forces of our three countries are courageously and relentlessly combating these criminal forces. We are certain to triumph. Nonetheless, in the short term, our security endeavors are weighing on our national budgets. In fact, a large portion of our resources are being channeled to the fight against terrorism in all of its forms. This is perfectly logical, given the fact that terrorism is hampering the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. We need to ensure our states continue to exist. Under the leadership of the founding fathers of the ASS, who wanted to ensure endogenous and sovereign development, various activities have been undertaken. We've established Investment and Development Bank within the Confederation. Its initial capital stands at 500 billion CFA francs, roughly $1 billion US. In order to ensure effective financing, the ASS calls for investment that places the priority on national agendas and exhibits full respect for state sovereignty. Thus, the ASS Confederation is in favor of international cooperation, especially South-South cooperation, across the following areas: technology, innovation, science, agricultural transformation, industrialization, the energy transition, the list goes on. Last but not least, the Confederation of the ASS calls for deep reforms to be made to international financial institutions. We call on the international community to exhibit greater solidarity, to sever the link between terrorism and its sponsors. By way of conclusion, on behalf of the ASS Confederation, I would like to emphasize the fact that in a world that is increasingly tumultuous, increasingly dominated by multiform threats to peace and security at the international level, the financing of development will require a paradigm change. We need a paradigm that incorporates a security dimension in our development programs. Given that it is on the basis of the promotion of international peace and security, with full respect for national sovereignty and with due regard for the deep-seated aspirations of our people. Thank you very much for listening to me so graciously.
I would like to thank the Prime Minister of Mali, and I have the honor of inviting His Excellency Mustafa Kemal Madbouli, Prime Minister of the Arab Republic of Egypt, to address the conference.
In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful, Your Excellency Pedro Sanchez, Prime Minister of Spain, Your Excellencies, Heads of States and Government, Your Excellency Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, ladies and gentlemen. First, I relay to you the salutations of His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi of Egypt to His Majesty, the King of Spain, and His Excellency Prime Minister of Spain, Mr. Pedro Sanchez, and would like to express our gratitude for the great organization of this event and the amazing hospitality. And I'd like to thank the Secretary General of the United Nations and his team for all the work that they've expended to organize this conference. Ladies and gentlemen, this Fourth International Conference on Financing for Development is taking place in a critical time with geopolitical tensions rising, as well as unilateral measures being undertaken at the expense of development and multilateral international cooperation. And we're seeing an ever expanding financing and development gap. Our world is witnessing today a recession in our ability to achieve SDGs and an expanding financing gap over the past period, in addition to the repercussions of climate change and the changes in the global map. And after 10 years of working towards SDGs within the 2030 framework as a comprehensive document in favor of sustainable development, everything that we've achieved so far is not up to the aspirations of our peoples. And the current climate is not a good harbinger for our ability to achieve those goals by 2030 and as planned. And this requires us to undertake concrete and effective steps in this conference in order to confront this reality. What developing countries are suffering from today, given the various and exacerbating challenges of the world, including the ever-rising index of poverty and the lack of food security and the digital gap and the increase in debt and the lack of funding and the higher cost of financing, all of this requires more serious cooperation at the international level to ensure that we don't reach a dire, if not catastrophic, state that threatens the entire economic system. And in line with the recommendations of the experts of the Secretary General that tell us that it is important to put in place a platform for exchange of knowledge and technical support and a program for debt for development, Egypt, as a middle-income state, has been able to strike a balance between its national priorities and benefiting from the financial instruments that are available at the IFI level. In 2022, Egypt has launched the national platform for a program called NWAFI, which seeks to mobilize development funding to get the private sector on board and to participate in development projects, including mitigation and adaptation programs through innovative financing as well as the elaboration of guarantees. And Egypt has been successful in striking swaps, debt for development swaps to the tune of $900 million with partner countries. Some of that money went through the NWAFI platform, which has accelerated the engagement of the private sector in development. And Egypt, between 2020 and May 2025, has been able to mobilize nearly $15.6 billion in favor of funding the private sector, $4 billion of which for the participants in the national platform called NWAFI. And as such, Egypt is ready and prepared to exchange expertise and technical support in implementation of the recommendations of the expert team of the SG. In conclusion, I would like to reaffirm the following messages. First, the importance of delineating a roadmap that increases access of developing countries to concessional financing and low-cost financing in order to redress the gaps in the global financial architecture as we expect the reform of that architecture, while we encourage the donor countries to fulfill their obligations. Second, we need to undertake concrete measures to reform the international financing architecture and make sure that sovereign debt is not exacerbated through such initiatives as putting together mechanisms to be able to sustain debt. Third, we need to mobilize the necessary tools and instruments to support developing countries in their development journey through technical support provision as well as capacity building, in addition to transfer of technology and the improvement of the various uses of AI. Thank you very much, and peace be upon you all.
I would like to thank the Prime Minister of the Arab Republic of Egypt, and I have the honor of inviting His Excellency Luis Montenegro, Prime Minister of the Portuguese Republic, to address the conference.
Muito boa tarde, Senhora Presidente.
Mr. President, heads of state and government, Dear friends, 3 brief messages from the government of Portugal. The first message is, where do we stand? Second message, what do we stand for? Third, what have we done and what do we intend to do? First of all, where do we stand? Sevilla is not just another international conference. The choice is simple. Either we renew the ambition of the 2030 agenda, or we accept a step backwards. Warnings abound. What is lacking is action and results. We had the honor of co-chairing, alongside Burundi, the preparatory process for this conference, showing that when multilateralism works, everyone benefits. The Compromiso de Sevilla presents clear proposals. Portugal supports them and will work with all partners to implement them. My second message, what do we stand for? Eradicating poverty, protecting the planet, and ensuring peace and prosperity for all. To live up to this ambition, we need an international financial architecture that ensures resources reach where they are most needed. In a world of conflicting priorities, we must listen, align priorities, and work in partnership. Mobilize my forces with greater focus and impact. We have raised this concern in various fora, whether at the UN, the EU, or the G20, advocating for a more prominent role for developing countries. We need a reformed, fairer system with rules adapted to the most vulnerable. In this spirit, Portugal co-facilitated with Antigua and Barbuda the creation of the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index, going beyond traditional metrics such as GDP per capita. Third message, what have we done and what do we intend to do? Portugal has been playing its part. Our cooperation policy is a state policy, focused on the priorities of our partner countries. Our commitment is clear. Geographically, with Africa, least developed countries, and small island developing states. Thematically, investing in a structural and transformative way in capacities such as education and health, while also promoting the green and digital transitions. Portugal also increased substantially its official development assistance in 2024, with the aim of mobilizing more private investment. The Lusophone Compact, in partnership with the African Development Bank, is one such example. So too is our engagement with the EU's Global Gateway strategy, for instance, in the Lobito corridor in Angola. In this spirit, we are innovating in sustainable financing. With Cabo Verde, we signed a debt for climate swap agreement already being implemented. A similar agreement is being finalized with São Tomé and Príncipe. We are investing in triangular cooperation, building bridges in an increasingly fragmented global context. In this regard, Portugal was the first country to contribute to the new triangular cooperation window of the UN South-South Cooperation Trust Fund, which is already supporting projects related to the blue economy. Dear friends, in a context marked by geopolitical tensions, structural changes in the global economy, and worsening inequalities, we reaffirm our belief that the answer lies in multilateralism. It is with this conviction and this distinctive approach, based on partnerships, that Portugal is a candidate for a seat on the Security Council for the 2027-2028 term. Let us fulfill the Sustainable Development Goals. Let us turn Seville into a true turning point with everyone and for everyone. Thank you very much.
I thank the Prime Minister of the Portuguese Republic, and I have the honor of inviting His Excellency Assis Akanouche, Head of Government of the Kingdom of Morocco, to address the conference.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
In the name of God, most merciful, most benevolent. Excellencies, heads of state and government, UN Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset of my statement, speaking on behalf, I would like to thank His Excellency, Mr. Pedro Sanchez. I would like to commend Spain, our friend, which is hosting this very important meeting on financing for development. There can be no doubt about it. All of our countries are doing their utmost to tackle economic and social challenges they face. Morocco, led by His Majesty King Mohammed VI, has reformed various priority sectors, such as health insurance, to give you one example, as well as housing. We've undertaken deep reforms in the education and health sectors as well. These reforms reflect my country's willingness to improve the living conditions of our citizens, laying the groundwork for general and widespread development. This will spur development efforts. Nonetheless, this requires significant additional financial resources. The Kingdom of Morocco has undertaken laudable efforts with a view to mobilizing financial resources in a more effective fashion. We did this by undertaking tax reforms, combating tax evasion, and by creating a tax climate that is development friendly. Thanks to these efforts, we've broadened our tax base, and remarkably so, over the last few years. Despite all of these financial resources we've mobilized, our financing needs for the various ambitious projects we're undertaking, well, we need additional resources. For this reason, this meeting is of particular importance for us. This conference is being held against an international backdrop that is characterized by formidable challenges linked to global economic development, as well as to the growing expectations of the people. This is why we must tackle international financing mechanisms. We must reform them without casting to the sidelines developing countries nor middle-income countries. To this end, we need to engage in constructive dialogue with the institutions that were founded in the last century, as well as with new generations, economic and social institutions, so as to meet the legitimate aspirations of our citizens. For this reason, financing for development is so crucial as we seek to reform traditional financing models to reinvent financing for development. Morocco, as a middle-income country, we are seeking to effectively contribute to the search for financing mechanisms that are new. These mechanisms could be deployed at the international level to ensure fair and sustainable development across our world. I thank you.
I would like to thank the head of government of the Kingdom of Morocco, and I have the honor of inviting His Excellency Denis Msmihal, the Prime Minister of Ukraine, to address the conference.
With respect to His Excellency the UN Secretary General, with respect to His Excellency the President of the Government of Spain, honorable heads of state and governments, distinguished delegates, high representatives, leaders of international organizations, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor for me to address you today. We met at a time of profound turbulence. The world is facing intense geopolitical tensions, wars, macroeconomic challenges, and systemic risks. These challenges are far too great for any country to overcome them alone. We cannot afford to step back from multilateral cooperation. On the contrary, now more than ever, we need unity, global solidarity and collective action. Ukraine fully embraces this spirit of global unity. We strongly support the role of international institutions, first and foremost, the United Nations, as well as the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and other international institutions. Our common goal is to end war, poverty and hunger, leaving no one behind, and we must support those who need help most in these difficult times. The right to development, one of the fundamental human rights, has been brutally violated in Ukraine as a result of military aggression of Russia. Millions of people became internally displaced, lost their homes and their jobs. This war is an assault on Ukraine's sovereignty, but it is also a direct blow to the very idea of sustainable development. Ukraine has always been a breadbasket for the world and a reliable contributor to global food security. We took pride in knowing that Ukrainian grain has trends to children in Africa and Asia. But today, Russia's unprovoked aggression has put global food security at risk. Our ports have been blockaded, our supply chains disrupted, our once fertile fields are now littered with Russian mines instead of grain. According to UN data, the war could leave tens of millions more people in chronic hunger by 2030. And all of this is because of a war started by Russia. But even as we defend ourselves from aggression, Ukraine strives to remain a source of stability and not a source of crises. With support from the UN and our partners, the Black Sea Grain Initiative helped deliver Ukrainian grain to the countries that needed it most. We launched the Grain from Ukraine humanitarian program, and with the support of international partners, we supply food to the most in need across Africa and Asia. I call on all countries and organizations present here to support these efforts and work with us to address the food crisis caused by Russia's aggression. Together with our partners across the globe, Ukraine also fights on the financial front, defending transparency and stability in the global financial system. I especially want to acknowledge the support of the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, and other similar bodies. FATF has firmly condemned Russia's aggression and already suspended Russia's membership for violating the organization's core principles. We are sincerely grateful to our partners for their unwavering support in addressing the risks Russia creates for global financial security. At the same time, we believe further steps are needed. Ukraine calls on FATF member states to consider placing Russia on the list of high-risk jurisdictions at the next FATF plenary. Dear colleagues, Ukraine's experience has made one thing clear. We need new, dedicated development financing mechanisms for countries affected by war or rebuilding after it. In Ukraine's case, such a mechanism is self-evident: a fair and full redirection of immobilized Russian assets to finance Ukraine's reconstruction. The crime of aggression must be met with a financial response. We call on our partners to work with us to establish a legal framework that would allow for the confiscation of frozen Russian assets and their use in rebuilding Ukraine. This would be a historic precedent and a powerful step toward justice. Of course, even the full amount of these assets will not cover the total cost of the war. That is why we also propose an additional source for recovery funding, a special international levy on Russian exports, an extra tax or tariffs on import of Russian goods such as oil and other key resources could be introduced. The proceeds would go to Ukraine Recovery Fund. Such mechanism for accountability would act as a deterrent to any potential aggressors. it would make it clear that violations of international law come with real consequences. For its part, Ukraine remains committed to being an active and responsible partner in global efforts. Even in the most difficult times, we continue to uphold the principles and goals of the United Nations. Dear friends, the people of Ukraine will never forget the support we have received from you. I want to take this opportunity to express my heartfelt thanks to all countries, international organizations, financial institutions, and communities that have extended a hand of support to Ukraine. We are deeply grateful to the European Union, the G7, the World Bank, the IMF, the UN, and dozens of other partners for the urgently needed loans, grants, humanitarian aid, and military support. We thank our partners in Africa and Asia for your political and diplomatic solidarity. You are not just helping Ukraine, you are investing in peace and global stability. We value your solidarity, and we will always remember it. Together we can turn the darkest of times into new hope for all nations. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your support. Slava Ukraini. Thank you.
I thank the Prime Minister of Ukraine, and I have the honor of inviting His Excellency Ntsokoane Samuel Matekane, Prime Minister and Head of Government and Minister for Defence, National Security and the Environment of the Kingdom of Lesotho, to address the conference.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, I bring with me warm greetings from His Majesty King Letsie III, Head of the State of the Kingdom of Lesotho. At the outset, allow me to express on my behalf and my delegation's behalf our deepest gratitude to the government and the people of Spain for hosting this important conference. We also appreciate the warm hospitality extended to us since our arrival in this beautiful and historic city of Seville. Mr. President, the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development comes at a critical time when the world is grappling with the adverse effects of climate change, financing challenges, limited physical space, and persistent trade barriers. The concomitant result of this situation on the continent of Africa is characterized by rife indebtedness, thus pushing us into abject poverty. This makes it difficult for these countries to achieve the 2030 Agenda and its sustainable development goals. The holding of the FFD4 conference, therefore, presents a once-in-a-decade opportunity for member states to renew their commitment in addressing this widening financing gap. While we appreciate and welcome commitments made in the compromise at the Sevilla outcome document, Lesotho prioritizes the following key action areas. 1, under the International Development Cooperation, we wish to underscore that official development assistance remains a critical source of development financing for many least developed countries, including Lesotho. Its decline poses a threat to the advancement realized that far in many countries. LDCs are grappling with a myriad of challenges that include the need to provide social public goods such as education, health, housing, and infrastructure. On the other hand, governments are faced with a serious challenge of youth unemployment, which, if not addressed, threatens stability. For us in Lesotho, the government is robustly engaged in measures to redress this problem. This requires financial support. While efforts are being made to address these challenges through investing in productive sectors such as agriculture and manufacturing, the effects of climate change and trade policies only compound the already existing burden that's impending progress. We therefore join the call on development partners to continue to honor their ODA commitments. We further encourage them to commit to multi-year cooperation agreements that provide more stable and predictable funding in the form of grants. On trade as an engine for development, we call on transit countries to cooperate more with landlocked developing countries through adopting policies that make it easy for landlocked countries to access markets for their goods. We further call for adherence to the already adopted trade rules under the WTO, as well as bilateral trade concessions. We reiterate the call to developed and developing countries in a position to do so, to provide full implementation of duty-free, quota-free market access on a lasting basis for all products originating from LDCs. As encapsulated in the current outcome document, including in the Addis Ababa Agenda and the Doha Program of Action for LDCs. With regard to domestic resource mobilization, Lesotho subscribes to the notion that developing countries need to be supported in mobilizing domestic public resources to invest on sustainable development. To achieve this noble goal, we need to step up effort to effectively combat illicit financial flows. We also need to strengthen revenue administration through improving the efficiency and effectiveness of the tax systems, including digital taxation framework. On debt, reports reveal that in sub-Saharan Africa, debt servicing consumed nearly half of all government revenue in 2023, thus limiting the region's fiscal space. To address this situation, we call for the lowering of borrowing costs. We further recognize the importance of assisting vulnerable countries in attaining long-term debt sustainability through coordinated policies aimed at fostering debt financing, debt relief, and sound debt management. Cognizant that science, technology, and innovation are pivotal for achieving the SDGs and economic growth, we are of the view that investment in digital infrastructure is crucial for many countries in special situations like Lesotho to support their STI activities and to fully leverage on digital transformation. The situation is dire in LDCs as infrastructure challenges in digital connectivity have a negative bearing on trade and regional integration. Therefore, we wish to underscore the urgent need to close the digital divide. Mr. President, let me conclude by echoing sentiments of other member states on the reform of the existing international financial architecture through making it more fit for purpose, equitable and responsive to the needs of developing countries. I thank you.
I'd like to thank the Prime Minister and Head of State and Minister of Defence, National Security and Environment of the Kingdom of Lesotho. And I have the honour of inviting His Excellency Mohamed Mustafa, Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs of the State of Palestine, to address the conference. This will be the last speaker for today.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, greetings from Palestine. At the outset, I wish to convey on behalf of the State of Palestine, President Abbas, and on my personal capacity, our sincere gratitude and deep appreciation to the government and people of Spain for graciously hosting the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development, and for the warm welcome and generous hospitality. Our thanks extend to the United Nations Secretary General and the United Nations Secretariat for their efforts in preparing and organizing this important conference. We further recognize the leadership role played by the co-facilitators throughout all stages of the preparatory process leading to this important gathering. We meet today at a time of global uncertainty amid ongoing multidimensional crisis. Nearly a decade has passed since we collectively committed to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. Despite our aspirations, and unfortunately, the world continues to grapple with mounting challenges. Obviously, financing remains a cornerstone in supporting the broader Sustainable Development Agenda, including the 2030 Agenda. The agenda must be inclusive, responsive to national context, and rooted in strengthened international cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, for the State of Palestine, unfortunately, we will not be able to do what we have to do in meeting our global agenda, 2030 agenda, because of what's happening on the ground. As you know, in 2015, we pledged to leave nobody behind. We also recognized that there is no sustainable development without peace. Yet, regrettably, the State of Palestine and its people continue to be left far behind. Israel, the occupying power, is systematically undermining Palestine's development and fiscal stability through a range of unlawful policies and actions, including the unlawful deductions from our clearance revenues, threatening to cut corresponding banking relations, escalating settler violence and military assaults, and imposing severe restrictions on access to our land and our resources. These measures continue to suffocate Palestinian life and to obstruct access to health care, education, and employment. The crippled economic activity driving a significant GDP contraction of more than 30% in 2024 and pushing unemployment rates beyond 50%. To date, more than $2.3 billion has been unlawfully withheld by Israeli government from Palestinian clearance revenues, which they collect on our behalf according to the Oslo peace agreement. These funds rightfully belong to our people. These deliberate acts by the government of Israel are undermining the Palestinian government's ability to pay its public servants' salaries and to provide essential services to our people. If this situation continues to be unresolved, the consequences of fiscal collapse would be catastrophic for us and for the region. Mr. President and Excellencies, this is a defining moment that demands immediate, coordinated, and decisive international action. The State of Palestine reiterates that ending Israel's illegal occupation, enabling the Palestinian people to exercise their right to self-determination, and achieving the independence of the State of Palestine are essential preconditions for fulfilling its commitments to 2030 agenda. We also like to take the opportunity to stress the importance of convening the high-level international conference for the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution in New York as soon as possible. We extend our deep appreciation to the co-chairs, France and Saudi Arabia, and to the co-chairs of the 8 working groups for their dedicated efforts. To advance the path for peace and to ensure sustainable development of our country, we have developed and begun implementing 3 major initiatives that, with your support and the regional and international support, hopefully we will be able to deliver as soon as possible. The first is an Arab plan for recovery and reconstruction of Gaza, initiated by Egypt and Palestine and endorsed by most of the world. And second, an ambitious reform and development plan that my government has developed with the support of the international community, and the objective of which is to improve the efficiency of our institutions and the governance in general. And thirdly, we're working towards developing and implementing a roadmap for building a viable and sustainable economy for our country, guided by the outcome of the working groups of the high-level international conference for the implementation of the two-state solution. In conclusion, despite the bleak realities on the ground and the immense challenges facing the Palestinian people and government, we remain steadfast in our commitment to building a better future for our people. Our people deserve to live in dignity, peace, and freedom. We will not be deterred in our pursuit for just and lasting peace. But to achieve this, the international community must act with resolve and sense of responsibility. Thank you.
I would like to thank the Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of the State of Palestine. We have heard the last statement for the general debate of this meeting. The debate will continue tomorrow, Tuesday, the 1st of July, as of 10 a.m. in this room. I would like to wish you a very pleasant evening. The session is adjourned.
you.